Yeah. Hi, Paramu. Welcome back to the Software People Stories.
Thank you, Shiv. It's a pleasure to work with you and be one of your interviewees. It's really great, Shiv.
Actually, I don't know if you read my mind, even though we didn't have any briefing or any detailed preparation for this. This is a slightly different format that I wanted to experiment with, which is like an interview. I have a curiosity question about you. And that's basically it, to understand the mind of Paramu.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. And we don't need to go through the normal introduction that we do, a self-introduction that we do, because our audience is very familiar with you. But still, to set the context for this question or conversation, I need to say what kind of triggered this. From the time I've known you, now you have played different roles in different organizations. And one theme that seems to be there in most of those is some ambiguity, either when you started or took on that role, or as you grew in that role, the scope of what you do or the impact of what you are working on. Now, whether it was as a project delivery leader or handling a business line, so to say, or setting up a center, which started as a support center for specific technologies, growing into the India Development Center, and leading a business around that, or your work in the social sector, where the challenges might be similar, but the solutions probably had to be contextualized to the region or the specific domain, etc. And more recently, the writing that you've been doing, plus the podcast, or the writing again spanning different genre, totally different things, whether it is about our culture, history, language, or something more technical about project management, agility, etc. So the question probably has multiple parts. I'll just share all of them and then you can take on from there. First is, while there are probably a lot of triggers for you, how do you pick an idea? How do you get latched on to an idea? And once you have the idea, how do you go about converting that idea into action, or idea into something that is realized, or something that others can also touch and feel or experience?
Okay. See, you know my history. I started off with Tata Burrows. After my studies, I started off with Tata Burrows. And the first 15 years, I was in Tata Burrows, right? And there it's more or less kind of roles defined by the organization. And I just kind of grew through the management ladder or technical ladder, as it were, right? And one of the things that I did, and you are also then doing the same thing, was that of a project manager, right? But those days, this project manager of a project just kind of fell into your lap, right? And I remember that there was no formal training at all. I'm sure you also know there's absolutely no formal training whatsoever for a project manager in our organization, right? So I just said, manage this project, and we started managing, right? And of course, there were some managers above us who would give us some hints here and there, right? So when you ask me how I latched on to that idea of a project manager, I didn't latch on to it. It just came to me, just kind of handed to me by the organization. And I somehow kind of blundered through it and somehow delivered the project, right? But when you come to the next thing, which was my role as the head of the Unix Development Center for Digital Equipment, there I was actually, in Tata Burrows, I started looking out for a different kind of option. And that's when I found this particular option in digital, right? And that the initial idea was that we would set up a Unix Development Center, which is actually a center where Unix products, including the Unix operating system from Digital's Nashua Development Center, would be brought to India and then some part of it done here, right? So that was the initial plan. But then as things took on, it became much more of an India Development Center, but not just Unix, but also other products like VMS and other products that we did here, right? And there the whole idea of looking for other, shall we say, products came mainly because when I went to the US and started talking to the Unix people, you found there were other people also sitting there having their own products. So why not talk to them, right? And then when you actually take your Unix experience and go to them and say, look, here is something that we have been doing with Unix. Why not with VMS? Or why not with whatever system that you're working on, right? So, and that gave him the confidence to actually come and do the product with us in our center. So even though the whole center started as a Unix development center, it grew into an India development center, mainly doing systems products, not really applications or accountancy, all that kind of stuff, just mainly systems products. So, so latching on to an idea of expanding the center and then maintaining it was more of, it was there, therefore I took it, like Mallory, Everest was there, therefore he climbed it. So similarly, those products were there for the taking, and they were happy to give it to us. So that's how that happened. So what I'm saying is different things, as there, some people have ideas thrust on them. Some people come up with ideas. So the first thing idea was thrust on me, the project manager. Second, kind of idea developed, right? And the third, my third job was an idea that I developed myself, right? So that was where I went and talked to some financiers, people who had money, Calcutta-based industrialists, who funded me to start a new center, right? Or a new software development organization, right? And there, basically, the idea was to hire people here, set up a team, train them, and then go overseas, get projects, bring them here, and then do it here. Again, mainly in the area of systems products, not really applications, right? But that was the time of the dot-com bust, so it didn't go too far, too much, right? So therefore, I left that, and that's when this opportunity of being the head or the CIO of an international NGO came up, right? And that the NGO was headquartered in London, right? And the whole idea was for me to go to London and then look at what is happening in London, first of all, because most of the organization's work was done in London. The main idea was to look at what's happening in London, streamline that organization there, and then set up an international strategy for the whole organization. And we worked in about 40 countries, right? So there, it was one level above that of my company, right? So first one was an idea was thrust onto me. The second one was where an idea was there and I grabbed it. The third was where I actually went and took the idea. And the fourth was an idea that was really huge, right? So that was where, an organization that worked in 40 countries, right? So I was actually creating IT strategies for the whole organization, right? And making sure that every country had their network, had their systems. That was the next level of, as you call it, ambiguity becoming more and more concrete, right? So there were 4 levels of that. Aside from this NGO, I had worked for about, I don't know, maybe about some number of decades. Had worked there, right? After that, when I left that and kind of semi-retired and joined our esteemed organization, PM Power, right? Totally ambiguous, right? There we had no really defined role, as it were. We all were partners doing different things, right? And the main idea was to see whether we can help others in achieving their goals, right? Either as consultants or as coaches or as helpers, right? So that was very ambiguous. And I think that I didn't develop my own ideas, we developed it together. Right? All of us together developed how the organization should grow. So we actually, it's not really ambiguous. It's much more, it's very concrete, what we're doing, right? And that is where I got the option of writing books. The whole idea of writing books came to me much before joining PM Power. I was actually reading a book by Bal Gangadhar Tilak, right? And there I found that he had interpreted a Rigvedic hymn to prove that the Vedas were 6,000 years old. Therefore, I said, why can't I take the same hymn and interpret that as a murder mystery? I mean, it's kind of a very flippant idea that started then. So over time, that idea developed. Again, it's very ambiguous. I don't know even how to actually start thinking about it, right? But then when you read those rigs or those verses one by one, those stanzas one by one, slowly an idea formed. And that's how the whole concept of this, the first Aryan, or the legend of Vrishakavi, the writing, that book came out, right? And for that, I had to actually learn a bit of Sanskrit. Even though I had learned Sanskrit in school before, I couldn't really call myself a semi-expert. Now I can call myself a semi-expert, right? So I had to learn a lot of Sanskrit, including Vedic Sanskrit, which is kind of different from classical Sanskrit. So I learned that, and then took that ambiguity of not knowing how to interpret this particular hymn in terms of a murder mystery and in terms of history. Took that and then refined that. So that is one place where I really took a real great ambiguity and then converted that into a very concrete area, right? And that required a lot of effort. It took maybe 15 years for me to actually write that book. At the same time, in PM Power, while we were developing our own idea of what an organization should be, I got this opportunity of writing a book for PM Power, which is a book on project management. The main question was how to present it, different from how others have presented it. Because project management is a vast area and many people have talked about it. The basic thing was to look at project management and since we were coaches, we got the idea of actually taking Krishna and Arjuna, right? So look at Arjuna as a project manager who's actually trying to execute the project of executing his enemies. Have him have some doubts, right? Which in fact Arjuna had in the battlefield of the Kurukshetra. He had a lot of doubts. So you have a coach called Krishna who then would advise him as to how to remove his doubts and get his doubts cleared. That's how the whole ambiguous idea was concretized into a situation of having Krishna and Arjuna. Right? At the same time, I started my third book, which was a book on languages. Right? Since I learned some amount of Sanskrit, and I had also set up a Sanskrit website with some 50 lessons on it, I thought maybe I could take that and kind of summarize that in a book. So I have a book called Sanskrit, 108 Facts About Our Mother Tongue. Right? So I call Sanskrit our mother tongue, India's mother tongue. The whole idea grew again from an ambiguous state of not knowing what to do to coming out of the book. That book should come out sometime soon in the next 2 or 3 months. And at the same time in the organization, another book was kind of brewing or on the stove, in the oven as it were. And that book was a book on Agile. Of course, so many people had defined so many things about Agile. And Agile was well known for its manifesto, which had some number of principles. And so what we said was, actually, if you want to go and implement Agile in an organization or have an organization go through an Agile journey, agilizing themselves, we need a set of principles, right? And that is what we define in our organization, collectively defined in our organization, and call them the 5 values or the 5 tantras, right, of enterprise agility, right? So that is how that whole idea was concretized. The idea of writing a book on Agile was concretized as creating a book on 5 values or 5 tantras, which was different from the 5 manifestos, which was Agile theory, as it were. Whereas this is more of Agile implementation in an organization. So that book also has been published, right? And the next ambiguous thing that I took up was music. Now, at the age of Shiv, let us not kid ourselves, we are both kind of, on the wrong side of the 60s, right? So
not yet for me, but yeah.
Not yet, okay. But for me, yes, I'm kind of 66 now. Almost 66, right? So I thought that music is a good way to kind of keep one's brain cells alive, and also one's juices flowing, right? So I took up music. I bought an ukulele, yeah, sounding like this. I bought an ukulele, right, and started learning that. And this was completely not really ambiguous. It's just I don't know where I was going with it, right? So I hired a teacher online, right? He was a very nice teacher. In fact, when I talked to him first, I told him, look, Eric, I'm slightly older than most of the other students. So he first wanted to meet my mother. So, but I told him I'm slightly older than most of the other students, right? So he said, no, don't worry. I've got one student who is 48 years old. Right? Very old, elderly gentleman. I said, don't worry, I'm at least I'm 20 years older than that. Right? So he was quite surprised. But I mean, he does a very good job, He treats me well, he gives me lots of idea. So every week, once a week, I have this class, right? And that ambiguity is slowly kind of going away, right? So the main problem with music, especially playing an instrument like the ukulele or the guitar, is that first of all, the fingers on your hand, every finger on your hand has to move independently, right? And that's a first coordination that you have to learn, right? The second coordination is between the two hands, right? So what I find is when I strum with my right hand and when I try to change chords on my left, the moment I change chord here, my brain goes to the chord and my strumming changes and stops. What my teacher tells me is that it's much easier for youngsters, right? At the same time, when I start singing, both my left and right hand stop, right? So this whole thing about learning this new instrument is highly ambiguous, right? So it's not easy, right? So even now that I'm still in that ambiguous phase of learning music, right? It's now 1 year and it's still sitting there, right? But slowly I think I can play, I can change some chords, I can even strum, a kind of a swing strum rhythm. I can strum. It's not easy, by the way, right? So that is at the same time I started reading about music to remove the ambiguity of actually learning an instrument and knowing what I'm doing. I started reading up about the theory of music, so Western music, Indian music. And I've put up a few pages on websites, right? So hopefully in the next 2 or 3 years, I'll be able to jam with my son. So these are some of the main things that I did that started off ambiguously and then kind of grew into something which I think is enjoyable and kind of concretized. So now that my monologue is over, if you have any questions.
Yeah, not so much questions. I was trying to make a note of what you were saying, trying to find some pattern.
Right.
And at least for the question that I had at the beginning of our conversation, the two main things I got was that there is not just one technique, but there are many ways which one needs to explore based on the context.
Right.
And that age is not a bar at all.
Right. Right.
And more specifically, converting ideas to action, first is you can explore and expand an idea. You can collaborate, get others also to contribute and develop the idea and convert it to action. One tough thing seems to be where it requires a lot of work. I thought ideas means you can just come up with something and share it. But the research that goes into it, learning, understanding the context, internalizing it, letting it simmer for a few years, like in the case of your book, and one day it'll come out. It's probably also about looking for metaphors or analogies to see how you can probably apply those and then expand this if there is no direct or very evident or something that you don't already know.
Right. In fact, when you talked about and collaborating, right now, you know that you and I and JV are collaborating on writing a book, right? A new book, which is kind of a sequel of the Agile book. Right? At the same time, I'm looking at writing another book on calendars of India. Right? I've reached about 30,000 words there. I've also read 30,000 words on the second Aryan.
Okay.
It's a sequel to my first book, Aryan. And there you ask how ideas develop. In the book called Second Aryan, right? The king has called together lots of scholars from different countries to actually have a standardized calendar for all their kingdoms.
Oh, okay. So there is some connecting thread.
And therefore, then I said, let me stop this and write a book on calendars and come back to this, right? So that's how the idea for this calendar is developed, right?
Oh, okay.
So now,
I will add something more to what I said, saying that if you define some boundaries or set some maybe quantitative goals, or like you said, 108 facts,
Right.
and then probably you have a goal, you can start working towards it.
Right.
Yeah. And two other things which I noted is looking for gaps in the current models, like you said about agile.
Right.
There is always some ambiguity about the adoption or what happens when rubber meets the road. And the last thing that I picked up is that the moment you decide to learn, get a coach,
Right.
a teacher.
Right.
Not always try everything yourself. And in doing that, another thing which you didn't mention explicitly, but something that I noticed was that being self-aware. When you said the hand coordination or singing versus hands and all that, at least knowing what is happening around you, etc. So it's been wonderful, Paramu.
And I just before, I know you. I just want to say something about this coach business.
Sure.
Right? See, before I hired this guy as my teacher, I was just going through different internet websites, right, and trying to figure out how to learn on my own. But I found that there were so many ideas floating around in the on the internet. You're not sure. In fact, even the way of strumming, I was actually using my forefinger and my nail downwards to strum down, and then the same finger going up, right? Whereas this teacher said, no, use a thumb going down and finger going up, right? And that made things much easier. The other thing is, once you have a teacher, you just do what he says, right?
Yeah.
You don't do too many things. You don't get, of course, what the teacher says may not be the best, but at least it's one thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
Not two things, right? So that is, see, the other thing that I think is important for those is that once you start, I think you have to stick with it. Sometimes you find that, when you start, you can easily drop things, start, drop. So that the other thing is the numbers. When I started my Sanskrit lessons on the website, I first committed to 50 lessons.
Okay.
I remember my son asked me, why are you committing to 50 lessons? But then the whole course fitted exactly into 50 lessons. So I said, once you define the numbers, I think the whole thing spreads out to actually fit that. Similarly, the 108 facts, right? So you're right. So that, even though you picked up on that well. Thanks.
Yeah. So maybe a variation of work expands to fill time.
Exactly.
Work expands to meet your goals.
To meet your numbers. Yeah.
Wonderful. Yeah. I could also relate to at least one thing that I've been doing, like this podcast, which is again, I said, after 60, what do I want to do something new? Learning something, doing it, setting some goals, saying we will have something weekly. And will not be like any other podcast or not similar to them, but then let's get people's stories of how they understood, what's been their learning. I think it has been wonderful. It has been a great learning for me as well. Some more ideas for me to explore. So thanks a lot, Paramu. I'm sure I'll have more questions for future conversations.
Great, Chef. Thank you very much. Great pleasure talking to you.